Our next thesis is that science supports atheism, not Christianity. And on this thesis, Professor Dawkins, I would like to read two excerpts from your book. The first is on page 67. You are quoting your colleague, the Chicago geneticist Jerry Coyne, with approval, and he writes, "To scientists like Dawkins and E.O. Wilson, the celebrated Harvard biologist, the real war is between rationalism and superstition. Science is but one form of rationalism, while religion is the most common form of superstition." Several pages earlier, on page 59, you write, "Noma," which is the idea that religion and science do not overlap, non-overlapping magisteria, is popular only because there is no evidence to favor the God hypothesis. Would you care to elaborate?
Yes. First, I'd like to respond a little bit to what John said on the previous occasion. I feel happier if we could have a bit more of a dialogue rather than this. When you say faith is rational and evidence-based, I mean, if that were true, it wouldn't need to be faith, would it? I mean, if there were evidence for it, why would you need to call it faith? You'd say just evidence. And when you said that faith in relativity, in Einstein's theory of relativity, is evidence-based, that of course it is. But the evidence is all important. I mean, Einstein's predictions fit in with observed fact and with a whole body of theory, whereas we only need to use the word faith when there isn't any evidence.
No, not at all. I presume you've got faith in your wife. Is there any evidence for that? On
Yes,
which
plenty.
you base it? Yes.
Plenty of evidence. Let's generalize it. Never mind about my wife. Let's generalize it.
It's the same with mine, Richard. It's the same with mine.
Let's say that in general, how do we know that somebody loves us? Okay?
Yes.
You can use a word faith for that if you like, but it's not the right use of the word. Because,
it is.
Because you know why, you know your wife loves you because of all sorts of little signs, little catches in the voice, little looks in the eye. That's the evidence that it is.
Yes,
that's
evidence.
Right. That's perfectly good evidence. That's not faith.
Yes, it is.
Well, okay, then we're coming down to pure semantics.
I think you've been influenced too much by Kant, you see.
Not explicitly, I have to say. Okay, let's go on. Which of these statements are we now on?
We're on the second.
Looking for an opening.
It didn't seem to have much connection with the quotes from the God delusion that you read.
That actually works well with the first.
Okay, it does. You read a quote from Jerry Coyne about the real war being between supernaturalism and naturalism. The context of that quote was the turf wars, in a sense, in American education between creationism and evolution. And within that context, I have been accused of letting the side down because, as you know, there's a problem with American education that some nutcases are trying to introduce creationism into American schools, which is obviously very bad for science, and my scientific colleagues are deeply worried by this and are trying to fight it, and all power to them. They complain that I am not helping matters, that I'm in a sense rocking the boat by saying quite openly that it is my understanding of evolution that has led me to atheism. And they point out again quite rightly that if I were called up to in a court of law testifying in favor of evolution and against the teaching of creationism, and the lawyer said, "Mr. Dawkins, is it true that evolution has led you to atheism?" I should have to say yes, whereupon he would turn to the jury and say, "My case rests." It doesn't do the cause of science any good to unite evolution with atheism. That was the context of Jerry Coyne's remark. Coyne was saying, okay, if you're concerned only with the narrow political battle of saving American science in the schools, then you should button your lip and stop talking about atheism. If, on the other hand, you think, as Coyne does, that the real war is between supernaturalism and naturalism, then you would say, well, the battle over evolution and creationism is only a skirmish. The real war is over something rather more profound. That was the context of that. Noma was the second quotation that you read. That's non-overlapping magisteria. The late Stephen Gould argued that there was no real battle between science and religion because they were about non-overlapping magisteria, different things, ships that pass in the night, no contact between them. They're about totally different things. I don't think that for a moment. I think that religion really is, in a sense, about science. I think that religious claims about the universe are scientific claims. I suspect that John may agree with me about this. Claims about the universe are scientific claims. A universe with a God would be a very different kind of universe from a universe without a God. Scientific methods are the appropriate methods, or at least the scientific way of thinking is an appropriate way of thinking for deciding whether we live in this kind of universe with a God or that kind of universe without a God. It becomes even more glaring where you talk about miracles, which, I mean, however much sophisticated theologians may profess their non-belief in miracles, the plain fact is that the ordinary person in the pew, the ordinary unsophisticated churchgoer, believes deeply in miracles, and it's largely miracles that persuade that person into the church in the first place. If there are miracles, they are to be judged as by scientific means. If there was a virgin birth, if somebody was raised from the dead, these are strictly scientific claims. They may be difficult to verify, but as I've said in the book, The God Delusion, if you could imagine hypothetically that DNA evidence could be discovered showing that Jesus never had a father, that Jesus was born of a virgin, then can you imagine any theologian saying, oh, no, not relevant, separate magisteria, science has no bearing on this case? Of course they wouldn't. Science has every bearing on this case. That's what I have to say about Noma, and I think I probably run out of my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Professor Dawkins.
Well, I agree with you very much on the Noma issue, Richard, that science and religion, keeping them separate. Actually, if you read the small print on Noma, it rather disconcerts you because it says that science deals with reality and religion with everything else. And of course, I'm not very happy with that. I certainly agree with you that the modes of logical analysis that science has introduced to you are the right ones to deal with many of the central claims of Christianity. I would widen it a bit. It's historical science, of course. We're dealing with events in the past. But Christianity is falsifiable in that technical sense. I would very much support that. Now, the thesis here is that science supports atheism, not Christianity. I think atheism undermines science very seriously. Because if you think of the basic assumption that all of us who are scientists have, that is, we believe in the rational intelligibility of the universe. And it's interesting to me that scientists of the eminence of Eugene Wigner and Albert Einstein use the word faith. They cannot imagine a scientist without this faith. Because, of course, they point out that you've got to believe in the rational intelligibility of the universe before you can do any science at all. Science doesn't give you that. Now, the interesting thing is this. Suppose we now look at that issue against the background of the two worldviews we're discussing tonight, atheism and theism. Atheism tells you, at least Richard tells us in his book, that since human life has been cobbled together by unguided evolution, it's unlikely that our view of the world is accurate, quite so. And if you are a reductionist, as you must be as a materialist, reducing beliefs to the physics and chemistry of neurological structures, then it raises a very big question, ladies and gentlemen. If in the end my beliefs, my theories, my scientific theories, are the results ultimately of the motions of atoms in my brain produced by an unguided, random, mindless process, why should I believe them? In other words, It's like someone sitting on the branch of a tree, cutting off the branch on which they're sitting. And it seems to me that therefore atheism actually undercuts the scientific endeavor very seriously. And that, for my mind, is a fatal flaw. An argument that purports to derive rationality from irrationality doesn't even rise, in my opinion, to the dignity of being an intelligible delusion. It is logically incoherent. But theism tells us that the reason science is possible, the reason that I can access the universe, at least in part through my human intelligence, is because the same God who created the universe is ultimately responsible for the human mind in here. So that's the base level. But when we come up a level now and look at science itself, we have the fine-tuning of the universe, the fact that the basic constants of nature have got to be very accurate in order to have a universe just like this one. Now, I know that some people prefer, that's the word that Sir Martin Rees uses, an explanation in terms of a multiverse, which actually doesn't, in my opinion, solve the logical problems. But I'm very interested in the verdict of Arno Penzias, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering the microwave background. And he says astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing, one with a very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the right conditions required to permit life, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan. So that physics itself, looking at the constants and the very, very specified numbers they had to have, comes to that kind of conclusion. And incidentally, the Bible gets very easily dismissed, I'm afraid, also in the God delusion. Penzias added, the best data we have concerning the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. It's interesting, ladies and gentlemen, isn't it, that we only got the idea that the universe had a beginning, evidence for it in the 1960s. It was very exciting, I remember it well. Because for centuries, Europe was dominated by the thinking of Aristotle, which put the earth fixed at the center of the universe, everything rotating about it and everything existing eternally. The fascinating thing is this, that when evidence began to arrive that there was a finite beginning to space-time, some leading people in the journal Nature, the editor, Maddox, said, this is dangerous. We don't like this because it'll give too much leverage to those who believe in creation. Now, what I find very interesting is this. The Bible is frequently dismissed as being anti-scientific because it makes no predictions. Oh, no, that's incorrect. It makes a brilliant prediction. For centuries, it's been saying there was a beginning. And if scientists had taken that a bit more seriously, they might have discovered evidence for the beginning a lot earlier than they did.
Professor Dawkins,